Welcome to the Founders Foyer with me, Aishwarya. This foyer is full of conversations, the space where creators, founders, and builders look for all the support and concepts to grow their ideas into products. Getting feedback and listening to customers tell us all about their ideas has been the favorite part for us product folks. Whether it's a new app, feature, or even a little shiny interaction, we just love getting validation from our audience. We're in the constant exploration of how best to solve our users' problems and jumping in as the demigods that we see. But wait, how do we know what exactly goes on in our users' minds? Like literally brain reading them. We'll look deeper into that magic ball for sure. So joining me today is Kristen Berman, the CEO and co-founder of Irrational Labs, a behavioral product design firm. She helps companies like Google, Airbnb, PayPal, Microsoft, and LinkedIn improve their products and services through behavioral design research. Yes, yes, the one where she helps builders and founders design, test, and scale products by making them learn behavioral economics. Kristen's work has been featured in the Stanford Innovation Review, TechCrunch, and Scientific American. And I'm super excited to talk to her. Thank you so much, Kristen, for joining me today.
Wonderful to be here. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. So, Kristen, before all of it, I'm super curious about the term irrational labs, especially the name, right? Because it reminds me of how we often say humans are irrational. So, is it because of that, or like what made you choose this name and kickstart the labs particularly, and what brought you into behavioral science as a space?
Yeah, well, Irrational Labs is co-founded with Dan Ariely, who's a behavioral
Hmm.
economist and wrote a few famous books. One of them is Predictably Irrational, which talks about
Yes.
how humans are systematically maybe making mistakes in ways that we can study, understand, and hopefully design environments that help us achieve what we want. And so Dan and I teamed up over 10 years ago, and we kicked off the Google Behavioral Economics group. So Google brought
Hmm.
us in. We worked with over 25 teams to basically bring this type of thinking into the hearts and minds of, folks from the self-driving car team at the time to Google AdWords to Google Apps. And so the start really came kind of, behavioral economics is an academic field. And, about 10 years, Dan and I really tried to bring that into companies in a real way,
Hmm.
but it's been happening across the field for quite some time.
Right. Yeah, no, you're right about the academic angle to it because I think when we context shift to the aspect of founders and builders, we've always been in the sight of something that is qualitative, which is why we try to understand why exactly would our users need this? Like what exactly do we have to solve for our users to use a piece of software that we're building? But I think giving it an actual process or like trying to really understand the design behind it was never in the picture because it was mostly considered from a research angle. So I'm actually very glad that there's more light on this and this is always what people term as touchy-feely things. I think it's very important when it comes to what we do with products. So yeah, happy to dig deeper into this, Kristen.
Great. Yeah, I think our general perspective is that folks working in product many times there are
Mm,
completely unsolved problems, but many times
mm,
there's literature or understanding about human behavior that has already been worked on. So
mhm.
if about something like connection, if you're an app working on how do you help people connect, there are hundreds of papers thinking about the theories of connection, and so we
Yeah.
shouldn't be starting from scratch. We shouldn't be interviewing 5 people and trying to, recreate the wheel. We should be
Mm,
first reading some papers. And, we say basically if we were to have a designer or PM, we would say instead of spending a day interviewing people to kick off a project, we'd say spend the day reading some papers and start with
mm,
understanding what we know about decision making to form your
mhm.
hypothesis. I think that's kind of what you can't maybe get from the customer interview is what the behavioral science world attempts to understand a little bit better.
No, absolutely. That's actually a very interesting thread to lean on. And when you say papers, like what kind of papers? And especially you've worked with founders, you've worked with builders. So when you kind of say that, hey, like let's say I'm a founder and I'm coming to you and saying that, oh, we have to listen to customer feedback and you're stopping me. What where do you think that I should start with respect to papers? Like what kind of stuff should I be reading?
It depends on what your problem is. So I think, there's obviously interest in just saying upskilling with behavioral science. We have a boot camp. We help people kind of understand basic theories of decision making. But think about if you're trying to build an incentive campaign to,
Hmm.
increase adoption of telehealth. Telehealth is something that increases access for folks in rural areas. That if we were to get folks to download a mobile app and connect to a doctor, it would be much easier for them. But turns out that doing that is very difficult, and
Mm,
it's never the right time. You're just going to wake up in
right.
the morning and download your telehealth app. Like that's a difficult. And by the way, when you're sick, it's not the time to do it either. You're not,
Yeah.
you don't really want to
That's
figure
not the
out an
first thing that comes to your mind. And yeah.
yeah. And so we've done now two experiments with how do you increase adoption of telehealth. And one was an actual
Hmm.
device, and one was through an insurance company. And in one case, we just tried different incentive schemes to try to drive some uptake. Now,
Okay.
it's an expensive proposition if you just throw money at people. Like
Hmm.
it's expensive and likely not worth it. And so if you're doing that, you should
Hmm.
probably read papers about how to design effective incentives. How do you increase the salience of the offer? How do you make it more powerful? This could be
Right.
a lottery. This could be loss aversion. This could be a fixed, a thing for one time
Hmm.
behavior. But there are definitely right ways to do things and wrong ways to do things to start.
Okay.
And you would waste a lot of time if you just tried to say, "Let me think about 5 things for my own
Hmm.
brain," as consulting with some prior research on what works and doesn't.
Right. Yeah, fair enough. And I think it sounds more like getting to the core mechanics of what you really want to do. Like when you said get to understanding what the incentives are, I think most often the mistake that product builders or founders do is they backtrace it from the outcome, but they are like very fixated with the outcome, saying, "Hey, I want my adoption to increase by certain levels, or I want my daily active users to come to a certain level, like download the app." And most of the mechanics is probably like stuck there. But like you said, what it takes as from a psychological perspective to come to that outcome is what a lot of behavioral economics and design would be. And you're right with getting back to the basics, trying to understand the mechanics. So yeah, I can't wait to dig deeper into those mechanics. So yes, this question that I would want to ask you in terms of, hey, like we always say, and it's something that I've seen you quote often, which is you could never fix real life problems if you build solutions around rational problems and rational motivations. But finding those irrationality is never easy, right? And like you said, you need to go through a lot of papers and research materials to come to that conclusion. But where would you suggest that product builders and founders build this as a mindset to spot the irrationality in the first place?
Yeah, we think a lot as behavioral scientists about what people do versus what they say they will do. And I think that's usually the best place to start is what your customer is actually doing
Mhm.
versus maybe, having them kind of predict their own future behavior, have you predict their future behavior. And so one place we start is just looking at, we call it a behavioral diagnosis, where we map out every single step it would take somebody to get to a behavior that you want to change.
Mhm.
And so there's a lot of pieces there. First, a product team has to decide what is the behavior you want somebody to do.
Mm.
And aligning on that, especially before you have a product is difficult, but it's hard to change behavior if you don't know what behavior you're changing. And
True.
so even if you don't know, calling it our hypothesis is that we want to, if you're a bank, you want to increase adoption of bill pay. And you can say,
Mm.
look, well, what type of bill pay do you want? Do you want rent? Do you want utilities?
Mm.
Do you want one time bill pay? Because that idea of designing for behavior change, if it's one time versus monthly, it is very different. Is
Right.
it aligned with your paycheck or not? Is it variable or not? Credit card would be different than
Mm.
a fixed bill. So those are the types of questions that we want to ask up front to say, look, we want to create a hypothesis about the behavior you want to change, and then you want to map the steps that people do to get to that behavior. And at that point, now you have some understanding of how you can hack it. Where are your points of leverage? Can you make it easier? Can you make it more motivating? in Irrational Labs, we have something called the 3 Bs, which is basically you pick that
Okay.
behavior you want to change, you decrease the barriers to that behavior, logistical and psychological, and we can talk more about what that means. And you
Hmm.
increase the benefits to that behavior. So you make it more motivating for me to do in the immediate sense, not in the future sense. And so by doing that, you kind of have an understanding, again, the behavior you want to change and where in the flows you can do that. By the way, if you're 0 to 1, that's fine. You still want to map the real things that people do outside of the product in the real world that get to the behavior.
Yeah.
But you have understanding about what you can actually do to move the needle.
Right. No, this sounds interesting. And especially the 3 Bs part. What do you think the barrier part would be? And is this something that, like you rightly pointed out, when you're in different stages of the product, let's say it's an idea stage where you're just building and people would just be curious around, hey, like let me just use this app, versus something that is perhaps in actual growth stage and later in a mature stage. Would the barrier be very different across stages? And would your design aspect around this behavioral economics also change depending on the product lane of it?
Yeah. So when we think of barriers to doing a behavior, it's so I said logistical and psychological. I like taking actually
Mhm.
kind of the AI moment now to say, look, when ChatGPT launched, it was an empty text box. People didn't know really what to do with it. An empty text box is logistically not that difficult. We all understand what it is, but psychologically it is because
Hmm.
what should I be putting in there? You could ask it anything. Well, what does that mean? And in the beginning, people are like, you could do a poem. It's like, okay, cool. Poems are great, but like we can do so much more. You could upload a document at this point and get feedback on your legal. There's just so much you could do. And so if you think about the progression of what ChatGPT has done or these other any kind of interfaces, we've given people templates and prompt
Hmm.
ideas. We now have assistants that you can click on. You have Copilot and Assist that get me real time in my workflows. So we've gone from something that is psychologically difficult, an empty text box, and we're moving to a world that decreases that kind of push the effort the user has to do, and we're making it easier for the user to do something that solves their problem real time. And so you can only imagine the future of this, which is it's not, it's much easier than the empty text box. It's much easier than probably a template or a prompt. And it's really helping me real time to do the thing I want to do. And that innovation is just making something easier. At the base level,
Yeah.
we're reducing barriers to the core model that's
Hmm.
behind the scenes for the user to interact with it in a way that solves their problem.
Yeah, yeah, totally. And what I really enjoy about this is that as much as it's very innovative, I think it reduces the fear that a user would have in getting started with something, because most of the barrier happens without the knowledge in terms of, hey, like what am I really supposed to do with this? And while as product builders and founders, we think it's super innovative to let them explore, like let them find a way out of what they see. It's often like you mentioned, like, yeah, this can do all of these things, but like, what am I really supposed to do kind of question comes with users. So, as much as I see the barrier part helps them do more and take benefit more, I think it also reduces the fear quotient. It also reduces a lot of uncertainty that would go on with them as they just get started with the products.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think most products just need people to start. So
Mhm.
if you're a mobile app, the idea of solving for day 30 is very funny because people drop at day 2. Uh, and
Exactly.
so and and so you need to make things easy enough for people to continue and motivating enough for them to want to continue. And we
Mhm.
tend to overestimate the likelihood that people get stopped by small frictions or underestimate the likelihood. So we basically one time we removed an empty again back to these empty text fields, but we removed an empty text field from a sign up flow and increased page over page conversion by 40%. Now,
Wow.
people get distracted, they don't understand, they procrastinate, you have to make things each page is a cost benefit analysis. So somebody is saying, is this easy enough
Mhm.
and interesting enough for me to keep going? And if it is, they keep going. And if it's not, they get distracted by the 15,000 things that we have to do in the world that aren't, downloaded. Oh, so
Yeah, true, true. And I think it boils down to what are you really optimizing for, like you, the user journey or the company goals and metrics, like what do you really want to do? So yeah, I think if you are leaning towards making it easy for a user, it's very important to understand your irrationalities that we're just talking about. So but if it's barriers and its benefits, what the third B stands for? Like what's the third part of the 3B?
That was so it's actually the first one, which is this behavior. So,
Oh,
behave.
right.
Yeah. So we typically, when we work with teams, we best have a team of behavioral scientists, and folks are really interested in the sexy psychologies that underlie our decision making. But again, to get to those, we have to push on what is the actual, very, we say, uncomfortably specific key behavior that
Mm,
you want someone to do. And this, we're, as product teams, very good at outcomes. We're good at active use and
exactly.
engagement, and report on those. And we're not suggesting we take those away, but that the product
Hmm.
teams have an equal focus on the behavior that you want someone to do. I'll give you a Netflix example. This is a Gibson.
Hmm. Huge fan
Uh,
of Gibson.
yeah, he came on my podcast and shared basically this idea that, yes, Netflix wanted people to increase retention, but the way they did this was by measuring the amount of videos that people rated. So
Mm.
why? Because if you rate a video, you're more likely to like the video. So their personalization algorithm went from basically looking at what other people like to looking at what you like. So turns
Yeah.
out the best predictor of what I want to watch is what I watched before and liked. And so Netflix had a journey where they were trying to get me to rate videos so that they could
Hmm.
recommend future videos to me. Now, the product team basically then had a very different challenge than retention. The product team had a challenge of how do you get people to rate videos? And it went from a 5-star, how do you like this video, to thumbs up, thumbs down.
Thumbs up.
And
Yeah.
yeah. And so why would that be? It's because the product team was focused on the behavior of rating videos. They said, how do you make this easier? People aren't doing it enough. It's not that they don't want to do it. It's that,
Hmm.
it's too difficult. Can we make it easier? Turns out when you make something easier, thumbs up, thumbs down, more people will engage. And so when
Yeah.
we think of that, it's a nice example of saying going from a business metric, retention, to a user behavior metric. And you want to correlate those. These are proxies for outcomes. You want to correlate those to the outcomes. But by focusing a product team on the behavior, you're more likely to get things that would correlate with doing that behavior. And if that's the goal, that is a very helpful orientation for design and product to have.
Yeah. That's a fantastic example. And I vividly remember as well, like when Netflix changed this whole narrative from the star to thumbs up. I think for me, the way I, as a product builder myself, was seeing it in close lines with what you mentioned is the fact that when you always gave rating, like when it was star, it was always from a very third person perspective because generally we tend to give Google ratings, we tend to rate something for others to see and others to get a perspective of. But it was never from the angle of, hey, this is going to apply back to myself. Like it's going to come back to give me the better set of videos to watch. So I think that's a very nice psychological move to give thumbs up. And I remember double thumbs up for something that you really enjoyed. So I think, yeah, it's definitely in line with what we would otherwise as humans think.
And I do think that these things are very simple, right? So it's this is not a
Mhm.
crazy innovation. We've just made something easier for people to do at a very micro level, and then people do it more. And so, this law
Yeah.
of kind of making something easier doesn't always apply, but for the most part,
Mm.
do things that are easy.
Absolutely. I think I get reminded of a lot of these consumer-based examples. I think Duolingo is definitely one example where people have raved about the whole streak mechanism that they have and the way they have users to engage and make them come back to the app. I'm curious, Tristan, because as somebody who's come from a business to business background, I'm also curious to see if you've worked with B2B SaaS companies that employ these little bit of tiny changes that you can make to help your users have a fantastic journey with the product? Like, do any examples come to your mind?
Yeah. So first, I'd say like B2B is there's two types of B2B. One is where you're trying to relate to somebody who is acting as a consumer. So
Yeah.
if I'm talking to a small business in Kansas, a florist,
Hmm.
it's more likely than not that she's not acting on behalf of a large organization. She's actually acting as a consumer. So we
Hmm.
did an experiment where we wanted people to small businesses to do something difficult. I'm going to kind of abstract this so I don't share too much.
Oh,
We
yeah.
gave we gave a credit for them, which is basically like a discount for future usage in
Hmm.
one condition. And by the way, this thing we wanted them to do is very beneficial for them. Like this was something they were already using the product. If they did it, the product would get better and easier for them to use. Successful users did this thing. So we said, look, we're going to give you a discount if you do the thing. Like, we really want you to do the thing. And then the other condition was, or we're going to give you a movie that you could order
Oh, wow.
online and night, and this is like, well, why the movie is like much less than that. We are giving like a or should try $100 discount. The movie is just like a
Hmm.
virtual movie that costs the company nothing. Why would somebody choose a much lower value? And obviously, it's because look that for that Kansas florist is just a mom who wants to watch a movie at night. So the movie was more successful. The movie was much less expensive, like wildly less expensive, and likely didn't help their business. If you want to be rational about this, it probably distracted them from their business because they were watching a movie when they could have been, cranking or working, right? And so
Yeah.
in that case, the small business is acting like a consumer. That you are when you're talking to them, they're not acting on behalf of their business. They're acting like a
Hmm.
consumer. By which a lot of the research in behavioral science is mostly directed to consumers, to people. It's not directed to SMBs or businesses making decisions on behalf of a company. Why? Because you can't do controlled
Hmm.
trials for that. So it's hard, you can't experiment on different cities. That would be a very difficult thing to control. You can't experiment on like Apple versus IBM. Like it's just
Yeah.
difficult to run. And so we don't have much data to suggest that all of these
Hmm.
interventions work B2B if people are acting on behalf of a
Behave.
company. Now, what I'm saying for folks who are in B2B context is that people tend to be more rational and have social desires when they are acting on behalf of a company. What does that mean? It means I have to explain myself to other people. I have
Hmm.
to, share a deck about why the decision I'm making. And so people need narratives, they need storytelling, and they're acting on behalf of somebody, which may not mean that they're as subject to some of these biases. And so
Right.
would more think about designing if it's B2B context for that person to explain themselves to other people. So you're just giving them reasons why they're right. They want to look good. They
Right.
want to look good in front of their peers.
Right, right, right. I think collaboration had a very steep curve, right? Like what started out as a single person collaboration eventually became a multiplayer collaboration. We have so many tools like Figma, Miro, so many tools that came up that let people bring in their teammates and work together on the same page. And whether it was with respect to Dropbox, how they did the whole, hey, invite your colleague and get like a referral and bring in somebody and get a bonus point or get a credit. I think if, it fits in, like you said, in terms of it could be consumerish, but eventually that seeped into the workplace setting where you brought in your colleagues, you brought in your teammates to work on something together, and it changed the way the whole growth around product was built. And maybe all of the PLG, the product led growth part, came through with this small psychological shift, right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, these products also just work better with other people. So
Mhm.
the idea of like me doing a design and not having people comment on it is probably not realistic. And so the product works better when other people are in it and involved. And so I think
Mm.
some of that, like picking a problem that works better when other people are involved if you want the product led growth. If you have
Right.
a single player game and you just need the accountant to use your product, like the product led growth is going to be more difficult than
Yeah.
if you need a design team to use your product, by which this is it's an easier challenge Figma had than some other B2B
True.
software single player mode.
True. True, true. And all of the consumer like switch back here, a lot of these irrationalities would play through, and all of the experiments that we're talking about would come into the picture because, people say certain things and they act in a certain way. So, yeah, sure.
I would add for the B2B audience that look, people make something easier. That is generally the answer
Mm.
to a lot of a lot of things. If you can't make it easier, make it feel easier because people have lots of things going on in their lives. The idea of adopting a new tool is tough and hard. And we assume that people don't like our features, they don't like our sales pitch, they don't like our pricing. Like that's the assumption when people are giving you a no or ghosting from a sales perspective. The other thing is like decision difficult, it takes time, you're uncertain. And so these are the logistical and psychological barriers that prevent people from acting. It may not be your feature set or your pricing. It may be that it's
Hmm.
too difficult for someone in this moment to adopt your new tool. And so the biggest lever you have is to decrease the friction of them taking the first step to do this.
Right.
You should consider changing your product and increasing benefits if you're getting nowhere. But first line of defense is always to decrease the likelihood that they have to do work for you.
No, I absolutely agree. And I think for a lot of us who've been in the product circles, there's always a strong belief in how the customer is right, because we've always been trained to tap into customer conversations and take a lot of feedback from them and then kind of say, hey, like, is the customer sharing? Okay, let me hop onto the call and let me just get to that. But looking at some of these examples and narratives that you're sharing, it's also very important that you don't fall into the bias of just listening to what your customers are going to say, because like you said, it's important to study what people do and not what they say. So a small sideline question here, Kristen, would be, if you know that these founders, if you've seen them go into the bias, how best can they break out of the bias? Like, how can they understand that they're actually falling into something that they're not supposed to be in?
It's difficult because customers tend to be really loud, and the ones who are asking for something aggressively could be the loudest. And so, we worked with a large fintech. They we wanted to increase financial health and well being, and they
Hmm.
said, "Look, the only thing we're interested in help with is budgeting. This is our number one request on our support forums. Our sales teams need it. We can't move on without budgeting." And we said, "Look, budgeting is a low retention feature. You're going to get people to start. It's going to be low engagement. Why? Because budgeting is difficult. It's like calorie counting. People want to do it,
Yeah.
and they don't follow through. And so we said, but we'll help you. So we tested 3 versions of budgeting. So we
Hmm.
said, look, we don't want budgeting not to work and say, oh, it was like, it's because we did it this specific way. And of course, if you improve the feature, you can increase adoption. We're like, no, no, we're just 3 different types of budgeting: category budgeting, weekly budgeting, or just like one number budgeting. And we said, if it doesn't work, bigger problems, right? And turns out when we released it, not only did it not increase any engagement, which is what they were hoping, but it didn't actually change anyone's spend. So people did
Mm.
not stick to the categories they were budgeting, change their spend. And so why did they want to release budgeting? Why were the PMs so focused on this? A lot of it we believe is that customers have words for things that they're expressing because there is no other word in the fintech space for help me with my life, my financial life. Like it's called budgeting. That's how we explain it. We said, I need to budget. Why? Because I'm not paying my bills on time. Why? Because I don't feel like I
Mm.
have enough money. And so, the idea of the customer language is very important, but we don't want to overread into the
Mm.
solution as of that, those words or those language. So I would have folks question kind of what is the behavior you want to solve? And then what is the easiest way you can help the user get to that behavior? So, if we were to redo this, we think about, and this is what we pushed to the company before we did it, rules of thumb. So it's much easier for me to say, I'm only going to eat out on the weekends. Now
Mm.
I don't have to track how much I'm going to spend on the weekends. I don't have to track if I have $50 left for this month to do it. All I'm going to say is I'm only going to eat out on the weekends. Now it's very black and white if I didn't do it. The progress tracking is much easier than calculating how far I am in my budget. And so you'd get to a brainstorm that's bigger than this is what customers want.
Right.
I'll I'll give another quick story. I just saw this tweet by I think the founder of Gas, who
Mhm. Nikita
said,
Bear? Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
it was yesterday. But he said, look, we one of the biggest feature requests that we had was DMing.
DMs. Yeah.
Yeah. And so we built it and our growth plummeted. And,
Mm.
his kind of hindsight analysis was that yes, people want to message people and say, hey, I liked you or I didn't like you or, and go back and forth. And that could actually increase their own value of the app. That is 100% true. His observation was like, it didn't increase the growth of the app because
Mm.
people then stopped kind of engaging in offline conversations and in generally sharing kind of the curiosity that actually the app was built on. So Gas is kind of
Yeah.
built on the idea that I am gonna maybe get liked by somebody, somebody's maybe gonna like me. I don't know who that is. And so this essence of curiosity is the core value of the app. And these DMs seem to undermine that. Now, so that would be an example of generally like questioning if users are requesting something. Yes, they actually may want it. So in this case, I do believe they did want it. Like, I
Mm.
don't think that that's a level of, but it may not be the core thing that they get value from, and that could that
Right.
could change your as you're launching the feature.
Yeah, yeah, no, very true. And I saw the tweet as well, and it's so contextual to the exact point that we're discussing about. Yeah, customers could be right, but often that's not what would add value to both what they would want and also what would benefit the users. I think the other example that comes to my mind is from this book called No Filter. It was written by Sarah Fryer, and it spoke about Instagram's early days when it was back then as Bourbon, and the founders were just building the tool, and it was not as fancy as what it is today. I think very contextual to this early days of Instagram, people figured that there was an app to share photos, basically like come up with your own photo album of sorts. And a lot of their growth was happening through Twitter because Twitter back then was the way that people instantly shared messages. And a lot of growth for Instagram came from Twitter. But once Twitter found out that, hey, like, oh my God, like you're getting all of the back traffic here, once they stopped, people from posting Instagram links on Twitter, the whole growth plummeted because they saw that a lot of the discoverability for the app didn't come from people being on the app, but it came through from a couple of other surrounding platforms like Twitter.
Yep.
So,
Yeah.
yeah.
There's a lot of small growth and user insights that one take iteration so that you're not going to get it right the first time, and two take kind of
Mm,
a second pass to say is this the actual thing that we should be building right now. Give one more quick example. We worked with TikTok
mm,
on decreasing misinformation. So misinformation is basically typically tagged by, if it's very clear misinformation, there's a gray area, of course, but it's taken off the platform. And in the gray area, they label it and they tell people, hey, this is likely not the thing that you want to share. They tell you,
mm.
and we designed this intervention for them before we launched. And we said, look, we're going to pre-test it. Pre-testing for us is kind of like quantitative UX testing, where we get
Mm.
1,000 users, we do 4 different conditions, and we ask people a battery of self-report and behavioral proxies. What this looks
Okay.
like is he saying, do you think that you would share, given this intervention and there's a flag and there's this label, do you think that you would share it? And well, we don't actually care that we say, oh, 20% of people think they will share it. We don't care about that absolute number. What we care about is relative to each condition. So did the flag that looks like this increase people's intuition that they would share or not share, or the flag that looks like this? Because our goal is to launch something that is the highest possibility of working. And what we found is that across the board, people did not think that the flag would work on them, regardless of how it was designed. They thought that they would not be influenced by it. And of course, when we did launch it, we found different. We launched it and there was a flag and a little pop up that said, are you sure you want to share this? And this decreased shares by 24%. So I think in some worlds, basically, there's a level of you can do a lot of pre-testing and to
Mm.
understand our intuition and sometimes market testing for products that have a disconnect between the intention and the action. So for
Right.
TikTok, it's a hot state. If people are in
Mm.
hot states, we have trouble predicting our future behavior. So it's hard for me to say, of course, in a cold state, I could say, of course, I'm not going to eat a cookie for for after dinner. I don't want to. I've thought about it. I don't want to. And of course, if the cookie is right there and it's warm and it's right out of the oven, of course I would eat it. And so product owners should think a lot about the domain they're in to figure out
Mm.
how much to trust users. And in hot states or domains by which decision making is quick, domains by
Mm.
which it's emotional, domains by which it's high priced or there's a lot to lose, we say users are more likely to not have a good prediction mechanism of their own behavior. And so that is kind of, as there's complexity to this. Behavioral
Yeah.
science is not this works or that works. It's the context is very important when we think about designing for decision making.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's a very good point that you mentioned in terms of how often we think we took time to take a decision versus, hey, like I just jumped into this decision. And this understanding how this plays out with the domain is a very good thing to think about because we often tend to take playbooks and techniques that work out from a very general perspective. But when we apply it back to where we're building from, whether it's for consumers, whether it's for businesses or, very, very different aspects, I think that is a point that we don't often brood on. We kind of like just say, hey, like this worked out for them. And I think just applying it here for us would just work out. And most often we're just taken up by the jargon. So it's a fantastic point to reflect on, especially if you're building out of hot stakes and you have customers taking decisions every day. Cool. Kristen, have two lines that I would like to dig more on. So one, especially because we spoke about some of these aspects of nudges, friction, good friction, trying to make users take decisions. So one of the things that I always thought in terms of a nudge or a hack or a friction is it's just getting a lot of negative sense and it brings an alarming vibe to it. But from what we spoke, I think there's a lot of positive aspect that could come based on analyzing behavior of users. So from your experience, what are some places where you've actually designed user experiences that are like very good and that don't utilize this whole fear, anxiety, and negative aspects of nudging?
Yeah, I don't think we should think about nudging as a negative thing. Every design the designer does is nudging me to do something. So
Hmm.
every single design. If you place a button in a certain area and you make it a certain width and you put a label in it, or you have a value proposition that says something specific versus something general, these are all going to change my behavior. The whole
Hmm.
world is designed to either get me to do something or not get me to do something. And my sense is we wildly underestimate this. And we
Yeah.
give the idea of the first design somebody does as the anchor and then changing it as a nudge. It's like, oh, the first design was a nudge too. God, the idea that somebody did this without thinking is wild. And I'm very disappointed if, and you can tell this with our either banks or credit cards. Like, they're not helping me save money. Banks just they have the incentive with deposits, and yet no one is texting me with low balance alerts. No one's texting me with, oh, that's not a default for banks to set up when you're coming in. They're not helping me do automatic savings. So the idea that the first thing the designer did is going to nail it or not be kind of intentionally changing your behavior is a funny idea for me. So that's kind of one. Two, nudging can be very broad, right? And nudging is this
Hmm.
idea that actually people have a way to opt out. So it's not as paternalistic as maybe it's the idea of this is you can always opt out. But by the way, there's also very nice research that suggests if you tell people it's a default, this will still drive them to opt into the default or use the defaults, pay attention to the default and the same rates and if you didn't say it was a default. And so,
Okay.
generally kind of choice architecture rules. If something
Hmm.
is easier for us to do, we'll more likely do it. And so, and nudging is actually, again, more than kind of a loss aversion idea, which is I will take this away from you or claim this thing. It really is about the design of our environments. And my
Mhm.
general sense, product managers, designers should really internalize that folks' attitudes, preferences, and beliefs are much less impactful than the design of the product. So, the idea that kind of a classic thing is, look, I like M&Ms, but if the M&Ms are close to me, I'll eat more of them. If they're farther from me, I'll eat less. My
Mm.
attitude and belief for the M&Ms has not changed. What's changed is my environment around me. And
Right.
as product owners, you control someone's environment. It's a very powerful position to be in, and we should take great thought and care about it. But by changing the environment, we can change someone's behavior outside of this kind of attitude, preference, or belief. And that's a very contrarian view to take. I would say it's not as contrary now that James Clear has kind of popularized this idea that
Yes.
you just go for a run and now you're a runner versus saying you need to convince yourself you're a runner and then go for runs. And behavioral science agrees. Behavioral science says get people to do the behavior, and this could
Mm.
drive some of their attitudes, preference, and beliefs. We don't need to say, oh, I love this product and now I will do the thing. Or I definitely am
Mhm.
somebody, going to be a Miro expert. It's like get them to use Miro. Now they will feel like they're a Miro expert. So
Yeah.
uh, yeah, I think most of us should think of ourselves like little behavioral scientists if you're touching a product because you are
Yeah.
definitely behavior.
Yeah. No, I can't agree more on that. And this, I don't know, you just brain read me because when you explained about this whole environment, the exact example that came to my mind was how James Clear brought this whole habit and micro habits part, where, if you want to run, if you want to read, you just pick it up as a micro habit, change the environment, go sit in a different room, just ensure that you start doing it and then have a consistent behavior out of it. So I think that's the most closest relatable environment that we can think of from our everyday lives and applying it back to the product building. Both of it are on the same league. So yes, it's very important to think on the environment for sure.
Yeah.
So this one last and final thing that I would love to get your thoughts on, and I think we started off on this note, right? We were talking about how ChatGPT and what we see with AI today has revolutionized and changed people's behavior, has reduced barriers. But there's also the other greatest plot around AI, which is so many tools coming up with the AI alternatives and AI quotients to it. And I have this question where I feel that as product builders, or founders who are working with AI, the plane from which they're operating from is the curiosity led innovation because they're like, hey, let me go dig on to the next best thing that I can ideate and bring it on so that my audience would probably start using it. But looking at it from a user's perspective, for them it's more like plug and play, and you see 10 tools today, 20 tools tomorrow, it's just going to keep growing on. So for them, it's a different ball game. So how do you think that behavioral economics is involved here for a very, very different decade that we're entering into, right? Because for a new behavior that AI is setting, there's something to keep in mind for both owners and users. So do you see both together in the same page, or what's your take on this?
Yeah, I'm excited about kind of at the highest level, AI will make a lot of things easier for people, and
Hmm.
which is likely good. So we could say that maybe not the social media level, but it'll make paying my parking tickets much easier. It will make making a doctor's appointment much easier. It'll make adherence for medical things much easier. And so we're in the very early stages. I'm not worried. I think there's a lot of tools that will get adoption and some that won't. I think this is the market kind of figuring out how useful things are when. But at the
Hmm.
highest level, we will get a big gains from a societal level. We will, you know, pay people in easier ways. We'll pay our taxes faster. We'll get legal support easier. Like our lives will likely improve significantly because things will be
Mm,
easier. And in the near term, the behavioral science opportunity is one to help design those products and make people's lives easier.
mm,
The real opportunity, behavior change is hard and you're disrupting somebody's status quo
yeah.
and it's very difficult. And so, I think when we think about kind of doing this for product teams, for example, like the ChatGPT, open text field. Like we have worked with companies to redesign what that looks like so that people
Hmm.
have earn faster time at getting the answers or the insights or the recommendations that they want. The idea of like just telling people some answer is unlikely if it was a human that you would believe it. So how do we help people increase trust,
Right.
reliability, believability of it? And this is very context dependent. There's no right answer
Mm,
here. And so for when we think about kind of the interim solution, it's how do we get people to change their current behavior and disrupt the status quo? How do we get people to trust the
mm,
answer given with AI? By the way, a lot of things is just reference dependent. So if you're thinking about if it's
nice.
an AI or human, you think the human may be better. And if we can re-anchor you that the human's not that great, there's a paper that just came out that said you will then choose AI because we're not actually
Mhm.
preferring humans versus AI. We're preferring an answer that is optimal for us. And
Right.
in this transition where humans are getting more used to AI, we have to remind
Mm,
folks in a much more salient and clear way that kind of the decision is it can be trusted and we should be confident in it.
yeah.
Um, and then, again, it kind of goes back to the fundamentals of if we're going to
Mm,
disrupt someone's status quo, we have to fit into their lives. We have to make it easy. We have to make it motivating. And so, if it's a new AI app that helps me with interior design, that it has to be easy and motivating, just like any other app.
yeah.
AI has an upside that hopefully is fundamentally making something easier. So, if I don't know interior design, the likelihood then the next year that I could probably upload a picture of my living room. And by the way, you can do this now. It's just not that great.
Yeah.
I could upload a picture of my living room and get the dimensions and the recommendations and the style guides and
Mhm.
a link to buy. It's starting. It's just going to get much easier for me to be the interior designer. And, you know, this is kind of an adoption problem like any other problem that we just have to figure out when to talk to somebody about this and help make it easy for them to adopt the solution.
Yeah. The core part of it still remains is how it appropriates to any SaaS or consumer or any kind of app. But one of the good things that you mentioned about the AI versus users is the trust part, right? Because right now, the biggest context shift that we have is not to look at it as AI versus humans. I think we've definitely come to a plane where we're looking out for answers and we're okay if it's coming from GPT. I mean, like we kind of address it like yesterday ChatGPT told me this. It's like say your friend told you this kind of a thing where we no longer say AI told me this, but then we kind of treat ChatGPT as like a buddy and kind of say that hey, like ChatGPT told me this. And this is what I was trying to work on. This is what I got to know. So that familiarization, I think, is definitely brought through with whatever advancements we've had so far, and combining that with the points that you said, I'm very excited to see how that goes and how that plays out.
Yep, for sure.
Yeah, yeah, fantastic. Thank you so much, Kristen. I thoroughly enjoyed this because it was so much learning into the irrationality part. And I think it's very important for the listeners as well to understand the other side of product building, which is hey, you don't always have to look at the product or the market or just what you see, but the hidden parts to it. So so much fun discussing those examples and all of those cases that you worked on personally. So thank you so much for sharing that on the show.
Yeah, for sure. And if folks want to learn more about behavioral science, they can just go to irrationallabs.com and we've got a lot of resources and a team if you're interested.
Yeah, for sure. I'll make it a point to include in the show notes. And yes, thanks for a fantastic episode again.